Something was buried inside their DNA. Something science wasn't ready to explain. One people, multiple origins, and a secret written in their genes for 10,000 years. What the Choctaw's DNA reveals will change how you think about human identity forever. Scientists ran DNA tests on Native American tribes across North America. Most tribes told a clear story. Their genes traced back to one migration out of Siberia, across the land bridge, and down into the Americas about 15,000 years ago. Clean, simple, predictable. The Choctaw were different. Their DNA didn't point to one founding population. It pointed to layers, distinct, time-separated waves of ancestry that didn't fit the standard story at all. The question wasn't just who they were. It was how many different peoples came together to become the Choctaw, and when. For most of history, the answer seemed settled. The Choctaw were a powerful confederation of Native American clans living in what is now Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana for thousands of years. European records from the early 1700s describe a sophisticated society. Skilled farmers, traders, and diplomats. By 1830, they were one of the so-called 5 civilized tribes. Thousands were forcibly marched to Oklahoma, the Trail of Tears. The accepted origin story was simple. Like all Native Americans, the Choctaw descended from people who crossed the Siberian land bridge at the end of the last ice age, moved south, and settled across the continent. Isolated, continuous, unchanged. It was a clean story. But DNA doesn't care about clean stories. When scientists looked more carefully, that explanation, while partly true, left something unexplained. Something that had been hiding in the genes for thousands of years. The first clue came from mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed only through the mother. It's one of the most reliable ways to trace ancient ancestry. Among the Choctaw, researchers found haplogroup B2 at high frequency. That was expected. It's common across the Americas. But they also found a sublineage whose age, calculated using molecular clock methods, pointed to a population split that happened far earlier than the accepted land bridge crossing. Not by decades, by thousands of years. This meant the Choctaw's founding population may have included a lineage that was geographically separated from other Native Americans for a long stretch of time, then reunited, merged, and became one people. That wasn't the only anomaly. Y chromosome analysis, which traces the father's line, showed a haplogroup pattern that didn't match their nearest neighbors. Groups living just a few hundred miles away had completely different paternal lineages. The Choctaw pattern was distinct. When populations live that close for that long, divergence like this needs an explanation. 3 theories emerged. None of them are comfortable. Theory 1. In situ differentiation. A founding group arrived in the southeast very early, around 14,000 to 16,000 years ago, became reproductively isolated, developed distinct genetic markers, then later mixed with surrounding groups. The Choctaw, on this view, are descendants of one of the continent's oldest continuous communities. They simply stayed put while the world moved around them. It's compelling. It fits some of the data. But it doesn't explain the paternal haplogroup anomaly. Isolation should produce uniformity. Instead, the Choctaw showed distinct male and female lineage patterns, which typically points not to isolation, but to contact. Specifically, the kind where large numbers of men from one group and women from another come together. That means movement, migration, conflict, or something else entirely. Which brings us to Theory 2, a secondary migration. A separate wave of people moving through a different route, possibly along the Gulf Coast instead of through the continental interior, reached the southeast and mixed into the Choctaw gene pool. Geological evidence confirms that during the last ice age, large portions of today's Gulf of Mexico floor were dry land. A vast, habitable coastal plain swallowed by rising seas. A migration route that once existed, now gone. The people who traveled it may have left no archaeological trace, but they may have left DNA. And then there's Theory 3, the one most geneticists treat with caution, but can't fully dismiss. That buried within the Choctaw ancestry is a faint but statistically detectable signal pointing back to a source population from a completely different part of the world. A signal that, if confirmed, would force a total rethinking of how the Americas were settled. No one has said this in a published paper. Not yet. In 2021 and again in 2023, two research teams published findings that shifted the conversation. The first team, led by geneticists at the University of Copenhagen, working with American tribal genomics initiatives, sequenced ancient DNA from burial sites in the lower Mississippi Valley, remains dating 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. These were pre-Choctaw peoples whose descendants may have shaped later Choctaw identity. Their genomic profile partially matched the modern Choctaw, but with key differences, especially in autosomal markers that reflect mixed ancestry events. This confirmed that the Choctaw's genetic story did not begin in one place at one time. It was assembled, piece by piece, over thousands of years. The second team, from Stanford's Center for Computational, Evolutionary, and Human Genomics, used identity by descent analysis to trace shared chromosomal segments across dozens of Southeast indigenous populations. The Choctaw showed a striking pattern, closely related to some groups, as expected, but also sharing ancestry with populations far to the west and with ancient coastal peoples whose modern descendants live far away. The conclusion was careful and scientific. The Choctaw are a genomically composite people, whose ancestry reflects multiple migration events, extended regional interaction, and a founding history no single origin story can capture. The lead researchers said it plainly. We kept expecting the data to converge on one ancestral source. It never did. Here's where the story turns. Most people assume that finding composite ancestry in an indigenous group diminishes something. That complexity undermines identity. That multiple origins mean a less authentic people. The data says the opposite. The genomic evidence doesn't reveal fragmentation. It reveals resilience. The Choccaw's composite ancestry is not a sign of disruption. It is evidence of survival. Of different groups under pressure from climate shifts, ecological collapse, and competing populations, finding each other and building something that lasted. The genetic mergers in the Choctaw genome didn't happen because they were passive. They happened because the Choctaw were active, forging alliances, absorbing outsiders, integrating through marriage, adoption, and clan membership. Their political structure was built around the negotiation of difference. The DNA is simply the biological record of that negotiation. But even that isn't the deepest layer. The deepest finding is about timing. Researchers noticed that the periods of greatest genetic mixing in the Choctaw ancestral line up almost exactly with periods of severe ecological stress in the archaeological record. Prolonged drought, the collapse of mound-building cultures, the breakdown of trade networks. The moments when old social structures failed and new ones had to be built. The Choctaw did not emerge from stability. They emerged from crisis, from the meeting of broken pieces. This isn't unique to them. Population genomics is finding this pattern everywhere. The groups we think of as ancient and unbroken almost always turn out, under close examination, to have been assembled from scattered parts, under duress, across vast stretches of time. The Choctaw aren't the exception. They may be one of the clearest examples. Imagine you're handed a photograph of your grandmother. You've known that face your whole life. Then someone tells you she had an entire life before you were born, one that shaped everything she became and shaped you. A life you never knew existed. For a moment, something feels lost. But sit with it long enough, and something else comes. She becomes larger, more real, more human. And what you share with her, the thing that runs through both of you, wasn't diminished by complexity. It was forged by it. This is what Choctaw Nation members describe when they engage with this research. Not anxiety, not loss, something closer to recognition. Of course we came from many places. Of course we were built from many peoples. That is what it means to still be here. The Choctaw were never what we thought. But what they actually are is more interesting, more human, and more instructive than the simplified version we inherited. They are not a people with a single origin story. They are a people with a survival story, written not just in language or legend, but in the molecular record of every body that passed its genes forward across 10,000 years. What the DNA reveals is not a mystery solved. It is a mystery deepened. Every layer of ancestry uncovered raises a new question about the world those people lived in, the pressures they faced, the choices they made, the strangers they chose to trust. And that may be the most important thing genomics is teaching us right now. Identity is not a point of origin. It is a direction of travel. The Choctaw have been traveling for a very long time. The data shows us how far. 10,000 years of survival. Not despite complexity, but because of it. That is the Choctaw story. That is the human story. If this moved you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.